Don't touch me. If you're here to use me too, then just leave. Elsie Mae said it before she even looked up, her voice raw, coarse, and stripped of hope. She was bent over a low wooden table in a sunburned Wyoming field, wrists tied, ankles bound, dress pulled out of place by force. The wood beneath her was hot. The rope bit into her skin with every breath. Summer heat pressed down hard, thick and unmoving. Back in the late 1880s out here in Wyoming territory, a man could call almost anything family business, and most folks would look away. Her legs trembled, not from weakness, but from knowing exactly what usually came next. Behind her, Virgil May moved slowly, deliberately, like a man savoring control. To him, this was discipline, ownership, a lesson meant to last. A hired hand stood nearby, eyes locked on the dirt, pretending not to see. A woman from the neighboring ranch whispered once, then fell silent. No one stepped in. No one ever did. Elsie swallowed and spoke again, her voice shaking now. Don't take advantage. Don't stick it in. She waited for laughter, for rough hands, for pain. Instead, there was silence, a shadow stretched across the field, long and unmoving. Hooves stood as still near the fence line. Elsie turned her head just enough to see him. A man on horseback, older, broad-shouldered, his beard streaked with gray. His eyes were fixed on her, not hungry, not curious, but hard with something she could not name. Thomas Granger had stopped without meaning to. He had been riding toward Laramie, mind on the road when he saw the table, the ropes, and the way the girl held herself like she was bracing for a blow she had already learned by heart. Medicine Bows sat west of town. A long ride and a lonely one. He did not speak. He only watched. Elsie misunderstood the stillness. She always did. Her breath hitched, and she whispered, almost pleading, "Now, if you're thinking about it, don't, please. I'm not worth it." The words burned worse than the rope. Years of being used had taught her that help never came without a price. Virgil finally noticed the stranger and turned, irritation flashing across his face. "This is family business," he said sharply. Thomas said nothing. His jaw tightened. His eyes never left Elsie. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The flies buzzed. The grass swayed. Then Thomas turned his horse slowly. Deliberately, he rode toward town without a word. Elsie felt something crack inside her chest. Hope maybe, or fear. She did not know if that man was leaving her to her fate, or if he was about to bring something far worse down on her head. Was that rider her last chance at freedom? Or had she just mistaken another predator for a savior? Thomas Granger did not ride far before the anger caught up with him. The dust followed his horse all the way down the road toward Laramie, hanging in the air like it had something to say. He kept his eyes forward, but the image would not leave him. The table, the rope, the way the girl spoke like help was just another kind of danger. He had heard that tone before years ago, back when he still wore a badge, and people told him what side he was on. Thomas was 48 now, bone stiff, beard gray, and tired in a way sleep did not fix. He had walked away from law work after burying 2 partners and one mistake he never talked about. Since then, he hauled freight when it paid, rode point for cattle drives, and kept his head down. But some things did not stay buried. By the time he reached town, his jaw ached from being clenched too long. Laramie was alive with summer noise, boots on boardwalks, someone laughing, too loud outside the saloon. Thomas stepped into the sheriff's office without knocking. Sheriff Amos Clean looked up from his desk, squinting through the tea. "Smoke, you look like hell," Klein said. "Seen something worse," Thomas replied. He told it straight. No drama, no guessing. A girl held like property on a ranch near Medicine Bow. Rope marked witnesses who would not talk unless someone stood first. Klein listened, tapping ash into a tin. When Thomas finished, the sheriff leaned back and sighed. "You sure you want back into this kind of mess?" Thomas did not hesitate. "She didn't ask for it." That was the line that landed. Klein nodded once and reached for a ledger. Then he hesitated, because paper meant responsibility, and responsibility made enemies out here. He called in Deputy Carl Briggs to take notes. Briggs came in smiling, casual, too casual. When Thomas mentioned the ranch, Briggs's eyes flicked away for half a second. Thomas noticed. He always did. "Family business," Briggs muttered. "That's what folks say." Thomas leaned forward. "That's what folks say when they want it to keep happening." The room went quiet. Outside, a church bell rang the hour. Inside, Klein closed the book slow. "We'll need a warrant," he said, "and someone willing to stand by their words, and we'll need the justice of the peace to put his name on it, or it won't hold for 10 seconds in court." Thomas thought of the girl again. The way she told him to leave, not angry, just tired. "I'll stand," Thomas said, as he turned to go. Briggs watched him with a look that did not sit right. Thomas felt it in his back like a hand pushing. He stepped outside into the sun, knowing one thing for sure. If he did this by the book, the rancher would see it coming, and if he did not, the girl would pay for it. So, which choice would cost more before this was over? Thomas didn't sleep much that night. He laid on the narrow cot at the back of the livery, boots still on, staring at the ceiling like it might give him better answers. Every time he shut his eyes, he saw that field again, and he heard the girl's voice, steady and scared at the same time. Morning came hot and bright, the kind of Wyoming summer morning that makes coffee taste like dust. Thomas washed his face at the pump, then went straight to Sheriff Klein's office. Klein was already there, hat on, pencil moving. He looked up and said, "All right, if we're doing this, we're doing it clean." "Clean is fine," Thomas said. "Fast is better." Klein nodded. "Fast needs proof." That was the problem. Everyone in town knew Virgil May was trouble, but knowing and proving were two different animals. Folks loved to whisper. They hated to sign their name to anything because Virgil had a long reach, and people who crossed him didn't just lose friends, they lost fences, livestock, sometimes worse. Thomas walked across the street to the small clinic behind the dry goods store. Docina Pierce, no relation to anybody important, was boiling instruments and humming like she'd seen it all. Thomas tipped his hat and kept his voice low. "Doc, if a young woman showed up with rope marks and bruises, would you write it down?" The doctor didn't even blink. "Son, I write down everything. That's how I stay alive." He asked one more thing. "If she comes in, will you keep her safe?" Doc Pierce set down her cup and gave him a look that felt like a slap and a blessing. "I'll put her in the back room and I'll lock the door." Next stop was the church, not because Thomas was holy. Mostly because churches kept records, and people talked to preachers when they wouldn't talk to sheriffs. Reverend Cole was sweeping the porch slow and steady. He listened, then said, "I've heard things." Then he said, "Hearing isn't enough." "I know," Thomas replied. "I need somebody to stand." The Reverend leaned on the broom. People will stand when they believe they won't stand alone. And even then, some will still back out at the last. Minute. By noon, Thomas had a short list of names. A woman who traded eggs with Virgil's ranch, a ranch hand who quit last spring and still limped, and one kid who delivered feed and came back pale as flour. Thomas took those names to Sheriff Klein. The Klein read them, then quietly shut the office door. Deputy Briggs was out front laughing with a man from the saloon, like the world was simple. Thomas watched him through the window and felt that same push in his back again. Klein lowered his voice. "Briggs has been friendly with Virgil for a long time." Thomas nodded. "I noticed." Klein slid a paper across the desk. A warrant request half filled out. Get me one witness on record today, and I'll sign this and ride before sundown. Thomas picked up his hat. Then I'm going to get her out long enough to speak. If you're enjoying this story so far, take a second to subscribe. It helps this old campfire keep burning. Now sip your tea, settle in, and tell me what time it is, where you are, and where you're listening from. But here's the question. How do you pull a terrified girl out from under a monster's roof without letting that monster know you're coming? Thomas left the sheriff's office with that warrant paper still blank and a knot in his stomach that wouldn't loosen. He didn't have the luxury of marching onto Virgil May's land empty-handed. Not if he wanted Elsie alive. Tomorrow. So he did what older men learn to do. He planned it like a man who's buried friends. First, he went back to Doc Pierce. She didn't ask for details. She just slid a jar of salve across the counter and said, "If she comes in, I'll see her. If anyone follows, I'll handle the door." Thomas almost smiled. Almost. Then he went to Reverend Cole. The Reverend listened, then nodded toward his wagon out back. "It's not much," he said, "but folks, don't question a preacher bringing a sack of flour and a few hymn books to a ranch." Thomas tipped his hat. That's more than much. They rode out in the late afternoon when the sun started to drop, and most men got lazy. The road toward Medicine Bow was long, flat, and bright, with heat rippling off the dirt like a mirage. When the ranch came into view, Thomas felt his chest tighten. He saw the same fence line, the same open field, and he prayed, quiet and plain, that he wasn't already too late. Virgil met them at the gate like he'd been expecting company. Deputy Briggs was there too, leaning on a post and smiling like a man who knew the punchline. Thomas kept his face calm inside. His blood went cold. Reverend Cole spoke first, friendly, harmless. "Evening, Virgil. Just bringing a little church kindness. You know how it is." Oh, Virgil didn't like church folk, but he liked looking respectable. Virgil's eyes slid past the Reverend and locked on Thomas. "You again?" he said. "This is getting personal." Thomas nodded like they were talking about weather. "It is." Then Thomas did the risky part. He asked to see Elsie just once, just to make sure she was alive, and to remind Virgil that town eyes were starting to look his way. Virgil's smile didn't reach his eyes. He waved toward the barn. Elsie stepped out a moment later, slow, stiff, her gaze fixed on the ground. She looked smaller than she had in that field, not because she was small, but because she'd been trained to fold herself up. When her eyes finally lifted, she saw Thomas and flinched, not from fear of him, but from fear of what Virgil would do later for letting anyone see her. Thomas spoke softly, like talking to a skittish horse. "Elsie, Doc Pierce is in town. She wants to look at your wrist. No trouble, just a check." Elsie's lips parted, but she didn't answer. She glanced at Virgil. Virgil stepped closer to her shoulder, smiling for show, squeezing where no one could see. "She's fine," he said. "Aren't you?" Elsie swallowed hard, then so quiet it barely carried. She said, "I'm not fine." Virgil's fingers tightened on her arm, and he whispered something in her ear that made her face go pale. Thomas felt the whole world tilt. One sentence, that was the crack in the dam. And right then, Deputy Briggs cleared his throat and said, real casual, "Sheriff don't need to hear family squabbles, Thomas." And he smiled like he'd already decided whose side the law was on. Thomas looked at Briggs, then at Virgil, and he knew it. Briggs was going to ride fast. The only question was this: would Sheriff Klein get the warrant signed in time before Briggs warned Virgil to erase everything? Sheriff Klein didn't wait for morning. The Justice of the Peace signed off by a lantern light, and Klein put his name under it. By the time the sky started turning pale, they were already riding hard toward Medicine Bow. They weren't many, 'cause you don't pull half a town into a private ranch fight. You pull only the ones you can trust. Deputy Briggs had ridden ahead, just like Thomas guessed. That meant Virgil May had time to lie, to threaten, to hide his tracks. It also meant Virgil was going to be ready. When the posse reached the ranch, Virgil was standing on the porch with a rifle across his arms, smiling like this was a social call. Briggs stood beside him, acting official, acting righteous. Sheriff Klein read the warrant out loud, calm and clear. Virgil laughed. Then Virgil did the one thing that always shows a man's true heart. He grabbed Elsie by the arm and tried to drag her inside to like a sack of grain, like a secret he could lock away. Thomas moved fast, faster than most men expect from a 48-year-old with a tired back. He caught Virgil's wrist and shoved him off. Virgil swung first, a hard punch, dirty and desperate. Thomas took it, blinked once, and hit back. It said, wasn't pretty, it wasn't fancy. It was two grown men in the dust, boots slipping, fists thudding. The kind of fight that leaves you sore for a week and proud for a lifetime. Elsie screamed once, then stopped, watching like she couldn't believe anyone was actually standing between her and that door. Virgil reached for the rifle. Sheriff Klein leveled his own gun and said, "Don't." That single word carried the weight of the law, and for the first time in years, Virgil hesitated. Briggs tried to speak up, tried to turn it into a story about family and misunderstanding. Klein turned on him, sharp. "Step back." Briggs didn't, so Klein's men did it for him, quick and rough, and the badge on Briggs' chest suddenly looked a lot smaller than it had a minute ago. Virgil was cuffed and dragged down the step. He kept spitting threats, promises, all the usual noise weak men make when their power is gone. Virgil did face consequences, but not the kind that would satisfy every angry heart. He did some time, paid some fines, and lost his easy control for good. He was out again before the year turned, but the whispers followed him like flies, and folks didn't tip their hats the same way anymore. And Deputy Briggs didn't go to prison, but he did lose his badge, which was the only thing he ever truly loved. Elsie didn't move at first. Then Doc Pierce's wagon rolled in, and Reverend Cole climbed down. Gentle as sunrise, Thomas had sent word at dawn. Because Elsie needed a doctor the moment the door opened. Because Elsie needed a doctor the moment the door opened. He held out his hand. Elsie took it. In court, it wasn't a clean victory. Wasn't enough. One witness got scared and didn't show. Another tried to change their story. And Virgil's friends acted like a man's home was his kingdom. Days later, people argued about it in town like they argued about the weather. He didn't give a speech that he just said because somebody had to. And maybe that's the whole lesson sitting under this story. You don't need to be young to do what's right. You don't need to be loud to be brave. Sometimes courage is just showing up and refusing to look away. And sometimes it's leaving the place that hurt you. Even if you love the sky above it, Elsie didn't stay near that ranch. She left Wyoming for a fresh start because safety mattered more than pride. Thomas never heard where she went, but he liked to think she found a place where the sky felt wider and the ropes stayed on saddles. So, let me ask you something. If you saw what Thomas saw, would you speak up, or would you tell yourself it wasn't your business? And if you were the neighbor, would you risk your peace to save someone else's life? And if you were Elsie, would you trust help again? After the world taught you, help always has a price. If this story hit you in the chest, please tap like and subscribe for more true Wild West stories that leave a mark, and tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are and where are you listening?